Right, well, good morning and good afternoon to some of our global Sangha. And please sit comfortably. There's a story from Buddha's time of a monk who had a very deep practice, but he was practicing alone much of the time and had the impression that he was fully enlightened because he was fairly serene. But he also wasn't being strongly challenged in any particular way. And a bodhisattva saw him and thought, and had compassion for him, and thought, I want to go speak to him so that he doesn't remain a little lost in his practice by a kind of complacency, I guess you could say. And so the bodhisattva came to him and just politely pointed out, you've got further to go with your practice. And there is someone alive today, not far from here, who is renowned for being a fully awakened being. And his name is Shakyamuni Buddha. So you should go see him. So the monk said, yes, I shall go do that. And so he walked to the town where the Buddha was living and went up to the Sangha and said, I want to meet this man. I want to meet Shakyamuni Buddha. I want to ask him a question about enlightenment. And the monk said, well, now's not a good time. He's on alms rounds and he doesn't answer questions when he's on alms rounds. So maybe just wait here and he'll be back later. And the monk said, no, I must ask him now. Life is too short, I must ask him now. And they said, it's just not a good idea. He doesn't answer questions when he's on alms rounds. But the monk persisted in this desire to see the Buddha, so they said, okay, well, he's down that way, and pointed the direction that he was. So the monk went down to the village where the Buddha was carrying his begging bowl on alms rounds, and came up to him and said, please teach me the teaching that will awaken me. And the Buddha said, my friend, now is just not a good time. Come back later. I will talk to you later. And the Buddha kept on walking. And the monk came up to him again and said, please, honoured one, please teach me, please teach me. And again the Buddha said, not now, my friend, this is not a good time. Not now is not the time. I will talk to you later. And the monk said, please, I really need to hear the teaching. I don't want to waste my time. Please teach me. And as is the tradition in many Buddhist lineages, if a sincere question is asked 3 times, and it needs to be a very sincere question, if it is asked 3 times, then the thing to do is to answer the question. And so the Buddha said, oh, all right, my friend, listen carefully. Only this you need to hear. In the seeing, only the seeing. In the hearing, only the hearing. In the sensing, only the sensing. In the cognizing, only the cognizing. The monk bowed deeply and left. Later that day, a wild oxen came running through the village and knocked the monk over and killed him. The villagers were quite distraught at his sudden, unexpected death. And the Buddha said, We should rejoice because he died an awakened man. He heard the teaching. In the seeing, only the seeing. In the hearing, only the hearing. In the sensing, only the sensing. In the cognizing, only the cognizing. So this is what I've been thinking about this last week. Normally I have something that captures my imagination. And so these 4 lines this week have been in my Zazen practice and in my daily contemplative practice. And one way we can think about it is when we're following our breath in Zazen, we breathe in, and we breathe out. And often what we do is we have the thought, I am breathing in and I am breathing out. And sometimes we even have thoughts like, I'm not doing this very well. My breathing is too fast. My breathing is too shallow. So this teaching is to help us just imagine a little bit and loosen up a little bit around our sense of ourselves as existing, as a separate entity. And just see if we can just breathe in, breathe out. Without attaching a story about our own existence to that experience. The same with all the other senses. We just see with our eyes, hear with our ears. Right now there's a lot of wind, and it's just making a kind of a regular sound. The sound of wind. And some wind chimes are making the wind known to us by their sound. And we just hear it without having thoughts about it, without having thoughts about ourselves in relation to it. And in the sensing, only the sensing. When we're sitting Zazen, we often get discomfort. This practice is to just feel the discomfort without a lot of thoughts relating to the discomfort. Move if we have to, but otherwise see if we can fairly dispassionately just be aware of the pressure in the knee or the pins and needles feeling in the foot, whatever it might be. And often there isn't any particular pain, but there is the sense of pressure of our legs against the zabuton or our bottoms against the cushion, awareness of the muscles in our face, the feelings in the shoulders. Throughout our day, we can just imagine experiencing by our seeing, our hearing, and our feeling, and including our tasting, if we can just sort of not have such a strong sense of us being the one, but rather than it's just an experience that is happening. And in the cognizing, only the cognizing, or in the thinking, only the thinking, I think this can be really very challenging. Most people identify their thoughts with who they are, but we can practice. A thought arises, and we can just imagine it's just a thought that it's arisen. Everybody has them. There it is. There's the thought. Whatever it might be. I'm a bit hungry, time for breakfast. Whatever the thought might be, whether it's a neutral or what we might think of as a negative thought or a positive thought, we can have a little less identification with our thoughts. And the reason that this is a very valuable practice is we do have a tendency to be very identified with our own sensory experiences and our own thoughts. and that is fairly preoccupying, and it means there is less time to be attentive to the needs of other beings. And also, I think it's important that if we're relieved by our self-identification, then we're more available to use our skills. So if we have a strong intellect, we're more able to use it. If we have artistic ability, we're more able to use it. If we have physical strengths, we're more able to use them if we have less time taken up with self-identifying narratives that tend to just loop over and loop over a lot. So it is deeply liberating to not identify with our thoughts and our sensations as being our own. But one thing about reading the Dharma or listening to the Dharma is it's really just a little nudge for you to take it into your own practice. All of us have to do our own practice, our own sitting. And maybe if these 4 lines feel compelling for you, which they might not now, but they might in a year or in 2 years, you could just sit with, in the seeing, only the seeing. In the hearing, only the hearing. In the sensing, only the sensing. In the cognizing, only the cognizing. And the Buddha gave this teaching to someone, saying, just this teaching is all you need. In this teaching, all the other teachings can be found, which is how it is with most of the Buddhist teachings, probably all of them actually. If you take any of the core teachings and really go into them, you'll find all the other teachings are also there. So I've got a couple of beautiful stories to read from our koan collection. It's from The Gateless Barrier. This translation is by Robert Aitken. This is case number 5. Xiang Yen up a tree. The priest Xiang Yen said, "It is as though you were up in a tree hanging from a branch with your teeth. Your hands and feet can't touch any branch. Someone appears beneath the tree and asks, 'What is the meaning of Bodhidharmas coming from the West?' If you do not answer, you evade your responsibility. If you do answer, you lose your life. What do you do?" So this is something we can visualize, that you're somewhere up in a tree. I always imagine my feet are about 3 meters or something off the ground, 10 or 12 feet off the ground. And you've, for some reason, you're hanging from a branch in between your teeth, but you can't reach any other branch. So it's just your teeth holding you up, holding this branch. It would be rather difficult to be in that position. And then somebody walks underneath you and says, "What is the meaning of Bodhidharmas coming from the West?" And this question is kind of a classic question in the Zen tradition, and we can ask it in all sorts of ways. But maybe we can say, why did the Buddha bother teaching after he woke up under the Bodhi tree? Why do we do Zazen? What's the point of my life? Why did Bodhidharma travel all the way from India to China? Why did he do that? What was his intention? What was compelling for him to do that? What's the meaning of being alive? This whole kind of broad questioning that people have some variation of. So someone asks, "What is the meaning of Bodhidharmas coming from the West?" So there you are, hanging by your teeth from a branch, and what do you do? If you don't answer, you evade your responsibility. But if you do answer, you lose your life. So in this, if you do answer you lose your life. This is in the seeing, only the seeing. In the hearing, only the hearing. In the sensing, only the sensing. In the cognizing, only the cognizing. We can leave ourselves out of the equation. We can lose our life. And then when we do that, we can answer the question or respond to someone who walks by and says, what is the meaning of Bodhidharma's coming from the West? And Wu Man makes a comment. Even if your eloquence flows like a river, it's all in vain. Even if you expound cogently upon the whole body of Buddhist literature, that too is useless. If you can respond to this dilemma properly, you will give life to those who have been dead and kill those who have been alive. If you can't respond, you must wait and ask Maitreya about it. If you can't respond to this dilemma properly, I think we could see that as we have to respond from our own experience. We can't just respond from theory. We can't just respond from ideas. But how do we respond to this dilemma properly from our own experience? And when we do, we give life to those who've been dead. So you awaken in people their true nature of who they are. Who are we? We're the whole universe. This is something to be so celebrated. It's so wide and expansive. So you give life to those who have been killed, to those who are dead, and you kill those who have been alive. So that is in a letting go of the small, very constricted sense of self that so many of us carry around, a very constricted, jaundiced, atrophied sense of self. There's a beautiful story, with sort of a background to Xiang Yen. It says here, when Xiang Yen was a young monk, he studied under Pai Chang, and it was only when Pai Chang died that he became a disciple of Kuei Shan. He was an intellectual, and like many intellectuals, had a hard time with the practice at first. One day, Kuei Shan said to him, I am told that you have been under my late master Pai Chang, and also that you have remarkable intelligence. But the understanding of Zen through this medium necessarily ends in intellectual and analytical comprehension, which is not of much use. Yet you may have some insight into Zen. Let me have your view as to your own being before your parents were born. And this line, show me your face before your parents were born, is again in quite a part of the Zen koan literature. Xiang Yen couldn't respond. He retired to his room and looked through all his notes of Pai Chang's teishos, but he could not find anything suitable. Returning to Kuei Shan, he said, I have failed to find a response to your question. Please teach me the essential point. Kuei Shan said, I really have nothing to teach you, and if I tried to express something, later you would revile me. Besides, whatever understanding I have is my own and will never be yours. Xiang Yen thereupon burned his notes and determined that he would be just a rice gruel monk and face Kuei Shan's profound question moment by moment, rather than trying to solve it by means of intellectual research. Hearing that the tomb of Nanyang was being neglected, he asked Kuei Shan's permission to go there and serve as caretaker. Kuei Shan approved, so Xiang Yen built a small hut near the tomb and spent his days cleaning the grounds, absorbed in his koan. One day, while sweeping up fallen leaves, his bamboo broom caught a stone and it sailed through the air and hit a stalk of bamboo with a little sound. Tock! With that tock, he was awakened. Hurrying to his hut, he bathed and then offered incense and bowed in the direction of Kuei Shan's temple, crying out aloud, "Your kindness is greater than that of my parents. If you had explained it to me, I would never have known this joy." This is a beautiful expression of this teaching in the hearing, only the hearing. He was sweeping, and his broom flicked up a little pebble, and it hit the bamboo and made a tock, and he just heard it. He heard that tock, totally pure, without any sense of himself or any idea. He just heard it, and his whole body cracked open. And in that moment, all of the teachings suddenly made sense to him. So all those years of study were not in vain, but all those years of study are not enough by themselves. We have to practice ourselves, contemplate ourselves. I like the way Kuei Shan said, I could tell you, but if I said anything, you would revile me later. We have to do our own practice. We have to find the truth ourselves in these teachings. So that's why we do Zazen, because that's the place. It's not the only place, but it's really the place. And returning to the breath is just a wonderful place. In the breathing, only the breathing. I'm just going to make it so I can see the people online a bit better. All right. And thank you. And would anyone in the Zendo or online like to comment or ask a question? And welcome to Peter. Nice to see you. A good friend. Sangha friend from Santa Cruz. Yeah. Anybody have anything they'd like to comment on or ask? Yes, Jamal.
Thank you. In the first story you told,
I'm just going to let people see you for a moment.
in the first story you told, the monk has what seems to be a deep impatience, kind of, I have to know right now, and can't possibly wait. And then he hears the teachings, and then later that day he's killed. I'm just interested if you can expand on if there is any meaning in that story about that impatience, and about
Yes.
that kind of that need to know right now, even when the Buddha himself is telling him to wait.
Yes, yeah. So Jamal just was asking if you couldn't hear about the monk in the first story, appearing very impatient and not waiting. And generally speaking, in the Buddhist tradition, there is a sense of being calm and steady, and not being impatient. But there is also this sense of practice, like your hair's on fire. Life is short, And I think this story is kind of showing that this monk realized after all this time of practicing that something was missing, and he had this aspiration. I think we think of it as this aspiration to really want to understand the nature of reality and wanting to end maybe his own suffering, or maybe he just had a little sense of restless unsatisfactoriness about himself, and he wanted to be freed from that. Or maybe he could tell that he was just slightly stingy when it came to being caring towards other people. We don't know all of the story. But whatever was not fully settled in him, he had this strong aspiration to want it to be resolved. So I think there's a place for being pushy. I remember with my first teacher, my kind of window coming into Zen was hearing about koans, and so I went to her and sort of said, I want a koan. And she sort of said, well, just follow your breath for 6 months or a year, and we'll take it from there. And I really didn't like that answer. And that felt really, at that time, felt very boring. It's not, but at the time it did feel like it was not that interesting. So I tried my best to comply, but it was pre-internet days, so eventually I wrote a handwritten letter and said, please just give me a koan. I really can't stand this. Just give me a koan anyway. Even though you said you wouldn't, please do it. Which, took a bit of gumption on my part to do that. And so there was something wholesome in that, and so she did. And there was something wholesome in my being pushy, and I think there's a place for us sometimes to be like that. What we need to be checking is it really sincere? Like, is it coming from a sincere place of really wanting to be, like, you're wanting to understand the nature of things? Is it coming from that? Or is it coming from, I'll feel more important if I'm a koan student, or I'll feel more important, whatever it might be. So we just have to check. So I think that's why in the story it says, if a question is asked 3 times and it's with great sincerity, then it needs to be answered. So, yeah. Does that make sense? Does that help? Evgeny?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. About his impatience. Or maybe he just sensed his death late in the day. Maybe it was a kind of real urgency in getting the answer.
Yeah.
So who knows?
Yeah. Evgeny was saying maybe he sensed an urgency. Maybe he somehow sensed his life was coming to an end. Or it could just be that it's a really good way to tell a story. So that we'll hear the teaching in the seeing, only the seeing, in the hearing, only the hearing, in the sensing, only the sensing, in the cognizing, only the cognizing. I think that's the effect it had on me when I heard the story. It was like, oh, yes, of course, all of us could die today. All of us could die tomorrow. And what do we want to do with this precious time that we have? I kind of like it sometimes when students are a bit pushy with me. Kind of like it.
What was your first koan?
What was my first koan? She gave me Who Hears, which is kind of interesting. I hadn't even connected that with this talk today. That was the first koan. Who hears? Just those 2 words. Yeah. Wonderful koan to work with. Rain?
Good morning, friends, and thank you, Sensei. This wonderful talk, really a wonderful, wonderful talk, and I look forward to listening to it again through the week. So I'm someone who really has made a practice of asking for things, and have found it a very deep practice that has changed enormously over time. And From my perspective, the repetition in asking is the thing that clarifies the intention, and that often my first request can be laden with all of those things that you talk about, a sense of self-importance, a desire to be heard, an urgency to be more important. And then when the no comes back, from the teacher or whatever the teaching is in that moment, it's in that engagement and relationship with life that you can discover yourself more deeply and who you were when you made that first request. And then consider whether to make the request again and then make it again. And perhaps in that second asking, more surfaces and more of that mud is cleared off the pond until you can find your genuine point and your true intention. And maybe that third request is what the master and the teacher responds to, because that's finally you've got to your sincerity and your genuine intention. So I guess what I've come to is if you have a dumb request, just make it. There's so much to be clarified just in that act of coming forward with the assistance of a teacher and the Sangha. Yeah, thank you.
As Reb Anderson, Tenshin Roshi often says, life is a conversation. We should be part of the conversation. Or practice is conversation. Okay, let's finish up and we'll chant together.